Hi, this is Lauren Grace from the Rainforest Art Project, and today we will be exploring perspective in art. As you look at the world around you with your newfound artistic eye, you can begin to build an understanding of perspective in your work. With the watercolor techniques we have learned, we will create an atmospheric perspective painting, showing distance and depth as the image fades into the background. Then we will use one-point perspective, utilizing only one vanishing point as we draw our name, creating a 3D quality. Then a drawing of a cityscape, continuing with a one-point perspective. The lines converging create the illusion of depth, whereas in real life, the lines would be parallel or side by side. Finally, we will draw another cityscape using two-point perspective, and we'll be using two vanishing points in this drawing. So let's get started. Alright, so what you'll need for your atmospheric perspective project is some watercolors, pencil, watercolor paper, some napkins, I've got an extra eraser there, some salt, got some black tempera paint, and a cup with some brushes in it. So first, let's look at a couple of examples of atmospheric perspective. You'll notice the background has these beautiful mountains far, far away, and the way the artist has communicated that is to make them this really beautiful misty blue, light blue color. It's almost matching the sky. It's just off slightly from there. And in the foreground, everything is a lot more vibrant and clearer, so it really draws you into the picture and takes you off into the background, as if you're traveling with them. And here is more of a one-point perspective with the atmospheric perspective going on too. You've got the mountains far, far away. They're in the cooler colors, and in the foreground it's warmer. There's more detail. It's very beautiful. All right, and for our own experience here, we're just going to create a few mountains using different shades of this purple and drawing it forward into a richer, darker color as we get right to the foreground, and in the far distance are the lighter misty mountains and some beautiful clouds going on in the background. So let's have a go at this. First, you want to grab your pencil and start with the mountain in the very front of the composition, and then just gradually placing the mountains behind, off in the distance there. Okay, so you're going to need a little bit of drying time between each section, between each color. Okay, I'm going to start by mixing some colors for myself. So you remember before when we were learning about watercolors, you're going to create little puddles of color over here. So bring some water over to the tray within your watercolors, and I'm going to start with a little bit of purple over here. And just remember, we need a little bit of drying time before we move on to our next color, otherwise those colors will bleed together and you won't get the definition that we're looking for between each mountain. So just to test if it's dry enough, just touching lightly with your finger, it should feel a little bit more firm as opposed to damp to the touch. I'm going to move on to my next mountain. So I'm going to use this color. Again, because we want it to be kind of faint, we want to lightly use the color, washing off the brush and moving the color down. Okay, so next you want to bring a little more richness to your color. So I've got that kind of reddish purple. I'm adding a little bit more purple for depth, and that should create a different color for this next mountain. But it is still somewhat off in the distance. Okay, a little more drying time. So I'm just bringing a little bit more of that darker blue over, a little bit more purple. Just want to keep adding to the color to make it richer and darker. A little bit of blue, a little bit of purple, a little bit of red. To meet with Chief Henry Standing Bear and other leaders of the Lakota Nation to plan their monument. He also met and fell in love with a young artist named Ruth Ross, but he had to put all of his plans on hold. So next we want to work on our perspective, atmospheric perspective of the cat looking out the window. We've got the houses getting smaller as they get further away, and then we've got those beautiful misty mountains similar to the ones we just painted in the very background. And once we've painted the houses and the mountains, we'll let that dry, and then we'll add in this perspective of the cat looking out the window. So this window is very close to us and the cat's very close to us, and the houses are further away and the mountains are even further away. So I love this painting for that. It really communicates it well. Okay, so I start with a little scratch paper. I'm going to use my ruler to mark out the curtain and the window sill, and then I will sketch in the pathway in front of the houses, and then I start to draw in my houses. They're getting a little smaller as I get further away, and then I get to put my mountains in the background. So now I'm going to sketch that onto my watercolor paper so I can keep that handy. So I'm measuring just about 3 inches in for the curtain and just about 2 inches up for my windowsill. So I can mark that out gently for myself. There's my windowsill, and then there's my curtain. And there we have it. Okay, so we can begin our painting. You can still use some of the colors that I used from before. And I also want to add some extra colors in there, so let's create our little puddles here. I'm just going to wet the mountain a little bit on the very furthest mountain. I'm just going to add a little bit of blue to that. So while I let those dry, I'm going to move down and start working down here a little bit. So I'm seeing some green for that pathway. These houses do get a little bit tricky, but it's okay. You can always go back in with a little bit of a colored marker to tidy things up if you like. Okay, let's bring some of that orange over to my roof. Painting isn't quite dry enough on one side, the color's going to bleed into the other. So we're just going to take a little drying time right there. 87. And now it's being worked on by their 10 children and 2 grandchildren. At 560. Themselves to preserving the legacy of Chief Crazy Horse. They made the statement that he is a hero because of his character and his loyalty to his people. He's remembered. So a little more drying time we had there. I'm ready to put my window frame across. You're welcome to use your ruler to help you get a straight line. I'm just going to go for it with a little bit of blue and a little bit of purple. And I want this paint to be quite thick, not too watery, so that it get a good saturated color over the top of my watercolor. So I'm going to start with a straight line down. So of course a ruler is very helpful. You can totally mark with a pencil or with your watercolor before you start painting. And see, I start with a kind of thin line and then I add to it, start to thicken it up a little bit for myself to make it look a little more substantial. And I can also go back over the line with my color to darken it. Alright, so I want to get that windowsill on there. A bit more of my blue and my purple. Holding my paper down so it doesn't jump around too much. And there's my windowsill. And again, you might want to do a couple coats here, that's totally fine. And then we need that to dry before we put our cat looking out the window. Okay? A philanthropist, and the funds were used to build the Indian University of North America next to the memorial. This will enable Native American students to better understand and appreciate and preserve their rich heritage. It may take the Sharkovsky family another 40 years to complete this amazing memorial. It's too slow. Enable Native American So now you're ready to fill in your cat with the black tempera paint. Just make sure you give it a little stir. It might have dried out a little bit if it's sitting there waiting for you. Okay, so make sure you're not bringing too much paint over to your painting. You don't want big globs of black paint. It's hard to take that away once you add it, so you want to be careful with how much paint you're using. And you can also kind of move back and forth between a smaller brush and a medium brush. So the smaller brush, you're going to have a little bit more control over filling in the ears and say the tail. and maybe the outline of the cat, and then you can use your medium brush to fill in the cat. And the reason I'm using tempera paint is it's much thicker, so it really makes that cat stand out rather than the watercolor over the top of the watercolor painting. So I really like that thick paint. Okay, there we have it. So we have a second project here for atmospheric perspective. As you can see here, we've got this beautiful complex and misty background with the castle just kind of fading into it. And we get to use quite a lot of our watercolor techniques that we learned in this particular project, because this is going to be a wet on wet, and we're also going to be merging in lots of different colors, as well as using some stippling to create this foliage, and a little bit of salt in there to create that texture. So this should be a fun one. I really like this one. Okay, so first things first, you're going to need your brushes and water, a little bit of salt, napkins, watercolor paper, and I've also got a little bit of scratch paper for sort of drawing and sketching out my castle, if I want to practice that before I put it on my painting, which is always nice to do. And then I've got a black pen, colored marker, to outline the very tops of the castle before I add the black paint. Okay, so let's have a go. So first I want to create a wet paper, so I'm going to completely cover it with water so that I have that wet background to add my wet paint. So just let that soak in a little bit while I create some color for myself over here. So once again, I'm going to create my little puddles of paint over here. Okay, so I'm just going to start dropping my color onto the paper and let it spread around. So I'm going to let that dry a little bit, and then I can begin to add my castle. Okay, give it a little bit of drying time. Okay, so next I want to just do a rough sketch of what my castle will look like in the background, maybe how many parts there are to it. So I'm just going to do a nice rough sketch just to get a guide for when I put it on my paper. It just gives me a rough idea, and then I can, with my dry paper, it's nicely dry, so you can see the way that it's sort of a little bit sticking up at the sides, and that's when you would just coat it with some water on the back and then maybe put something heavy on it to really flatten it out. We can do that later, but now I'm just going to lightly sketch my castle on here. Something else I want to think about is I'm also going to be adding some salt further down here, so that paper will want to be quite wet for that salt to go on there and do its thing, which we would like it to do. So let's just get our little turrets full of black paint. So I'm just going to move this paint down, and then I'll come back with a smaller brush to fill in the tops of the turrets there. But I just want to get this water happening while it's still wet. I want the paint to move. So I'm just trying to let it blend in here using the water and letting it move down. And I'm going to use my salt here. So you brush off the salt later once it's dried. Okay, so I'm going to use a smaller brush to fill in the tops of the turrets. I'm going to give that some drying time, and then I'm going to come in with my coloured marker to just clean up the very tops of those turrets. And now my castle's had a little more drying time. I'm just going to tidy up the tops of the turrets. Gosh, it all went together quite nicely. Just to kind of neaten them up. Should just blend into the watercolour paint. I'm thinking I might want to just dry my brush off a little bit and just put a little bit more texture on top of those trees with a fairly dry brush. So I'm just going to pick up a little bit of green from here and just do a little bit of stippling just to give it a little bit more texture closer to us. And there we have it, our atmospheric perspective watercolor painting. Alright, so we're going to learn how to write our name in 3D using 1-point perspective. So you're going to need some paper, a ruler, pencil, eraser, some coloured pencils and a coloured marker. So you can go with cool colours or warm colours or a combination of the two, it's up to you. So here's one I did earlier. So that's the direction we're heading in. Looks really bright and fun and sharp, and this is the horizon line, and this is our vanishing point. So that's what we'll be putting on our paper as we begin. So you want to think about what part of your name you want to use today. If you've got a very long name, you might want to use a nickname or your last name. So my last name is Grace. It's a little bit shorter than my first name, so I'm going with that. And I'm going to start by creating my horizon line about 1/4 of the way down the page. And then I'm going to create my vanishing point, which is here, which is where all the lines will be converging. So that means they will travel up towards there and meet at that point. And then I'm just going to gently sketch out my name. And what I really want to make sure is that I have enough space between each letter. Because once I've sketched out my name, I'm then going to create block letters, or, you know, fuller letters to work with. So I will work down here. This is about the center of my page. I'm going to drop down a little bit further and just start to mark out my name. So there I have at least a pencil width between each letter. Alright, now I'm ready to use my ruler again, and I just want to start from each corner of the top of the letters, and I want to have them converge up at this point. Okay, so I'm using my ruler, got my vanishing point and the top corner of my letter, and I just want to create a line there. Now I'm dropping down to the top of the G there. I want to extend that back towards the vanishing point as well. But it doesn't need to go all the way back because it's going to be hiding just behind the other letters there. Okay, and then I want to decide how deep those letters are going to be, how 3D, how far back they want to go. So I'm going to draw a line straight across the top here. I'm going to end around there. And then I'm going to take out the vanishing point. Alright, then I'm ready to start using my coloured pencil. So I'm going to do the very front of the letters, orange. So I'm going to go around each letter with my orange, just so I get those edges clear and I know where I'm going. And then I can use my hatching to start to fill in. Something else I want to think about is if there's a little source of light coming from somewhere, so the very edges at the tops of my letters might have some light reflecting off of them. So that's what I think I would like to do, is have a little bit of light. So I'm just going to give myself a mid-tone over the whole front of the letter, and I might come in with a stronger hatching on the left side there. Next I want to think about where my shadows are going to be. So this area here would be in the shadows. So that's going to be my dark brown. So here's where I get to show some of that light reflecting just off the very tops of the letters here. I'm just going to take about a mid-tone about halfway across the top of the letters. And then I'm ready to use my marker to just outline . Alright, so spend lots of time practicing and then you can fine tune it until it looks a little bit more like that. Okay, so what you'll need for your 1-point perspective building and sky drawing is some scratch paper, ruler, pencil, eraser, colored markers, the colors of your choice. You can go cool, you can go warm, you can have a mix of both, it's up to you. And then I've got some oil pastels to do this cool sky effect that I've got going on up there. And then I've got a little napkin to kind of clean off my oil pastels if I need to. Okay, so first things first, if you just want to have a quick look at this one, we're just basically creating as many buildings as work on your paper to this 1-point perspective that's kind of infinitely in the sky. So there's no horizon line that we're working towards in this particular 1-point perspective. But we do want to start with our point right in the center of our paper. And from there, I can create as many buildings as I like. I'm just going to put this one aside. So I always want to use this as my beginning mark. So I don't actually need to draw my buildings all the way up to this point, but I do want to say, well, that's the beginning. And then I'm going to come down to the top of my building and then sketch out. Okay, so I'm coming down to the top of my building and then using my ruler to sketch out. And then I can use my ruler to create the top of that building, like so. And then you can just move your paper around so that it works for you. You don't have to be too awkward about it, but just be comfortable. So make sure you can use that the way you want to, moving the paper. You can create the top of the building there. And then also to create depth, I want to see the shadow down the side of the building. So the side of the building will be in shadow. So I want to just use that 1-point perspective again and drop down here at an angle and then continue down. So that's the side of the building that I can see there. Maybe another one here. Alright, so from there I want to use one of my darkest colored markers, and I want to go back over all of the lines that I've put on the paper. So you can use your ruler, or you can just use a somewhat steady hand. Alright, and next I want to erase that point that I placed in the center of my paper. Now before I put all the windows on my buildings, I want to just color in all these shadow sides of the building with my darkest marker again. So all I'm going to do is use my hatching technique to just gradually fill in the sides of the buildings. And I'm drawing at an angle like we learnt our hatching, and that actually also helps my eye see that the building is sloping down, so it helps with the perspective as well. If I just kind of scribble it in, then I'm going to see later on that the marker lines are kind of all over the place. So if I can use that gentle hatching and take my time, stay within the lines, then the effect is much better. Alright, so here it's kind of reminding me of our patterns and texture lesson that we did before as well. So when you start to do your designs on the buildings, it sort of takes on a feeling of pattern, you know, because it repeats itself. So that might be a little bit of inspiration for you as you're thinking about how you want to what you want to create on the front of those buildings. But for now, we're going to work on our oil pastels up in the sky. So you can see here I've used actually the 3 different colors. So I'm going to start, like we learned in the previous lesson with oil pastels, is you know, for blending the power of 3 colors, going from dark to light. So I'm going to start with my darkest oil pastel out of my 3, and I'm just going to kind of scribble a few sections just lightly on the side of my pastel. And then I can come back in with my white oil pastel, and I'm going to use, you can see I've already been using that, it's pretty worn down on the side there. So instead of using the very top of my oil pastel, I want to rest down on the side there and I get good coverage. And I'm doing a thing like a little circling motion to start to bring those colors together. So I could work on that a little bit more, or I could leave it where it is. It's up to your eye really. And then I want to start creating my designs on the front of the buildings. So just remembering, if you're creating windows, they're going to be much smaller towards the top, and then they're gradually going to get larger as we get further down the building, or closer, the building is closer to our eye, the base of the building. So alright, and then you can come back in for some final touches. Maybe you want to work on the sky for a little bit longer, melding those colors together. Maybe you want to go back around everything with your darkest one. A little neatening up of any edges, that's up to you. It's a little tricky to go back over oil pastel, but with a little bit of diligence you might have some luck there, just neatening it up. But there you have your 1-point sky and buildings, 1-point perspective sky and buildings. So now we're ready to work with 2-point perspective. Here is a small diagram or example of 2-point perspective. We have a horizon line, and we have point A and point B. So what we're going to need for this particular project is some paper, eraser, pencil, ruler, some colored pencils, and some colored markers. And I just wanted to pull in this beautiful painting by Gustav Kalbot. And here you can see a building in the background that has the 2-point perspective. So you can see it used in a beautiful piece of art. This is a rainy day in a Paris street. And so that's a lovely example. Somewhere I'm going to be heading is in this direction. So once we've figured out how to add those buildings on in 2-point perspective, then we can get a little creative and add quite a lot of buildings and then have a pavement coming down. And then hopefully moving towards some texture and patterns on our buildings. I'm thinking a different color for each building, a different pattern or texture, and a little bit of decoration in the background and the foreground. So let's have a go. So just like when we were working on our 3D name, you're going to want to start with a horizon line. So that's where the sky meets the earth or water, depending on your artwork. So I actually want to come down a little bit lower than the midline or center line. And I'm going to create a line all the way across, like so. And then I'm going to create a dot just towards the edge, not quite, maybe half an inch in. So we've got our first point and our second point. So just like this picture here, you've got point A, point B. So I can refer back to those points and they'll make sense to you. Maybe I'll put an A there and a B. So again, your eraser is your friend. If there's anything that's not working for you, you can use your eraser. And also, because we're working with 2-point perspective, we're going to be putting a lot of lines in that will then be adjusting. So eraser really does need to be right there. Okay, so to begin our first building, as you can see here, we have a vertical line pretty much in the center there. So that's the corner. And it's as if we're looking down 2 streets at the same time. So that's really the perspective we have, as we're looking at 2 streets at the same time. And we're going to build our 2-point perspective from there. So you really want to start with the very first line of your building is a vertical line. And that's going to head down the center. And then from this bottom corner, point, I'm going to travel out to point A and then travel out to point B. So there are our 2 converging lines heading back into forever and ever infinity and beyond. All right, so the very top of the building, again, I want to take that line from the top all the way down to point A and another line from the very top of the building out to point B. Just like that. Keep that handy. All right, so this very corner is going to be my very first building. So now I can decide how wide the front of the building is with another vertical line. And then I can decide how far the other side of the building goes with another vertical line. And there you have that first building right on the corner there. And this is where I can start to take out some lines that I don't need, and you'll start to see those buildings appear. So this is really what you want to practice. You can practice this for a while on some scratch paper, just until you get that particular pattern of events of going off to the left and going off to the right to create one building. Okay, so what do we want to do next? So if I want to create another building that's a little bit higher than the one in front, then I'm going to create another vertical line, which is going to be just on top of that building. And so this building behind, I want to take the top of that building again down to one side and then the other. So this looks like that side of the building goes off forever and this side of the building goes off forever, but I can subtract some of those lines as I decide how wide that building's going to be. So here the vertical line is really only going to go to the top of that first building. And then maybe the side of the building will come down that horizon line. I can create another building with that horizon line if I want to. Okay, so now I'm going to take out those lines I just put in. So you can see that building standing behind the building in front, which is pretty cool. So here I'm going to create another building which is a little bit lower. So here they start to take form and you're able to kind of see what we're up to here. Okay, so I'm going to create another horizon line. It's kind of a midway, another vertical line, pardon me, vertical line. So when I'm creating it for the left side of the building, I always want to be taking from the top of that vertical line out to my horizon. Out to my... Say that again. So I always want to be taking the top of the building on the left side out towards point A, and then from the top of the building out towards point B, so that I get a true point of view here. So that building's not going to be so high or so far out. Kind of creating an interesting building material. Okay, and again, using my gauge from point B, a little bit of that building's going to come out and down. And if I want to re-establish the bottom of the face of the building, then I'm heading out towards point B. There we go. So now we have 1, 2, and 3 buildings. All right, so I already have a line coming out here, so I can create another building behind simply by bringing that line down and then taking out what I don't need. All right, so I think you get the idea. I'm just going to continue to work here and you can watch the process. Okay, so there we have our 2-point perspective with all the buildings in place, and then I'm just going to go in and take out all those little lines that I don't need anymore. And then I'll be ready to start outlining each building with a different colored marker. Actually, something else I want to do is create a little pavement, a little sidewalk in front of these buildings. So I'm just going to take the very corner and drop down about 1 inch, and then I want to take that point all the way out to point A, and then from that lower point there in the foreground all the way back to point B, which creates my little sidewalk there in front of the buildings. And now I want to start choosing from my colored markers and deciding which building is which color. So here again we have the example, so I want to really have a fun time here with cool and warm colors all mixed up together. So now you're ready to fill in all your buildings with beautiful patterns and textures, so you get as creative as you like. Alright, so now I'm ready to decorate the sky and the foreground. I want to use my coloured pencils for this. Just gives it a little bit of a softer effect. So I'm just creating these kind of bubble clouds. And then down here I want to use a few different shades of green and also maybe some black in there. Here we go, there's our 2-point perspective cityscape. This is Lauren Grace signing off with the Rainforest Art Project, changing the world, one piece of art at a time.